Resolution amending Ordinance 93-2019 to replace the Neighborhood Partnership Program with the Beyond the Table Grant Award Program and declaring an emergency. Mr. Hardy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. The two new items you have before you are related. As you know, we've been having long conversations for several months now about the need for us to retool and in some regard to replace the NPP program with something that would be more aligned with HUD requirements, as well as increase the impact with our longstanding partnership between the city and Akron Community Foundation. And in having that conversation or being pushed in that direction, we've been working with council leadership on a new program, a revamped program that City Council can own and utilize in an effort to make sure that as much as possible, anyone who used to rely on the old NPP program would be able to avail themselves of some other funding from the city. And so what you had before you in this ordinance, as it states, repeals or replaces the NPP program with a new program called Beyond the Table. And that name is significant. It means a stronger and closer partnership between the city and the Akron Community Foundation to make the On the Table program, which they administer and many of us participate in the last 2 years, meaningful from an action standpoint. We, in working with the Akron Community Foundation, and I'm going to refer, I should take a step back, I'm going to refer to this one-sheeter, which has a nice chart that outlines the difference between the two new programs. So before I go that, I'll make sure everybody has that. If not, we can make copies real quick. Sure. So looking at the Beyond the Table program, the award amounts will be no less than $10,000, no more than $20,000 per award. It will be, the awards will be given out to the best applicants, not necessarily ward specific. We have $200,000 of available funding, which is what we've had in years past between, it's roughly $100,000 from the city and $100,000 from the Akron Community Foundation, which again, and John Garofalo is here and correct me if I'm wrong, makes this one of the largest grant programs that ACF administers along with us. You do need a match. That is a HUD requirement. That's a federal requirement. When we are using federal dollars, there needs to be a match. And we are focused on 3 of the key areas that came out of On the Table. And that is diversity, equity, and social inclusion, drugs and addiction, education, and youth. You do, in your application process, will need to have a targeted area. So you can't just say we're going to have a citywide program. There has to be a neighborhood focus to it. It's reimbursement based. Again, this is just the city's practice. We reimburse. We don't necessarily write a check upon award. The application will be electronic through the Akron Community Foundation. However, we will make paper copies available to those that wish to do so. And given that this is a larger grant amount, we are proposing a due date for the initial phase of applications as August 1st for this year. That will likely change. It's just that we are at this stage of the calendar year, we will probably move it up so that we can take more advantage of the summer months. So again, the Beyond the Table program really focuses on asking residents, nonprofits, agencies to give us their best ideas, and when I say us, it's always a joint decision between the Akron Community Foundation and the City of Akron, on grant awards. What are your best ideas around these 3 areas based upon the data that has come through the last 2 years of On the Table? We have put in your mailboxes the application, the sample application. If you have any questions about that, we'd be happy to entertain those. And Mr. Chairman, I'll stop there since this. I don't believe the application. Okay. We will make sure we get that. I know we have the neighborhood application for the city council program, but we will get that. It's, we can get a copy of that for you. But at that time, Mr. Chairman, I'll stop on this program since this piece of legislation just deals with beyond the table.
Questions from committee members? Mr. Mobian?
So the match,
Yes, ma'am.
are we talking financially, matching only, or in kind? How are we talking about the match?
The match can be defined as things other than cash, yes. So in-kind volunteer hours count. And again, that's historic with how we have administered programs out of the planning department. So it's not just a cash match.
So if we go with that kind of mix, is there a percentage of cash versus a percentage of in-kind?
Just one-to-one.
Could it all be in-kind if?
It can all be in-kind as long as it's one-to-one with the dollars we're putting in. And we do help them, based on IRS and HUD standards, identify what is a volunteer's worth in terms of an hourly rate. Thank you.
Now, I don't know about the community foundation, but most foundations are looking to funnel money through a 501c3.
That is correct.
Is that the case in this case as well?
It is. However, as in years past, neighborhood organizations or residents that are not themselves a 501c3 can utilize a fiscal agent, excuse
They
me.
can connect with one, okay. So you said something, and I think I understood you correctly, that it doesn't necessarily have to be per ward. It could be, so if you have one ward that comes in here with a multitude of programs that would address these three areas, are we looking to fund those? Is that what we're talking about?
We are not putting a ward-specific, i.e. we're going to give 10 grants, one per ward. We're going to go with the best applicants that we get. So yes, it is possible that a group of agencies could come together and put together a series, whether together or separate, a series of outstanding applications and be awarded. But it's, I should be certain here to be clear, it's one award per agency, so you can't have a nonprofit that brings in 3 or 4 different applications and gets 3 or 4 different awards. And again, they have to be tied to these 3 specific focus areas. So yes, it is possible, but we're going to do our best to obviously encourage parity across the geography of the city. But it is possible that a great 2 or 3 great applications that come from one area of town could be awarded under this program.
Can I follow up,
Yes,
Mr. Chair?
please.
I know that when we started this neighborhood partnership program, that it was to be kind of administered, oversight, or whatever you want to call it, by the council person. Now, are we looking to do beyond the table as part of that as well? That if you're going to do something in a ward, then the council person needs to be involved in that to whatever extent necessary?
So that sounds an awful lot like what we're proposing for the new Akron City Council program. So I might put a pin in that question, and when we go through the other program, if it's still a question, we can revisit it. But for Beyond the Table, having the city council person's support isn't necessarily a plus or a minus. Obviously, we'd much rather the ward person be in favor of it, but it's not a requirement. But we have put something like that into the new Akron City Council Neighborhood Partnership that I'll talk about in a moment, but it's not a requirement in Beyond the Table.
But it looks like when you did the total funding, it looks like you took the 10 ward concept times the max.
That's correct.
And that's how you came up with the 200,000. I'm not really sure if I understand why you would pull out that person that they have elected to be specifically involved in that.
We're not pulling them out. We encourage and we'll be looking to the city council members to help us identify and get the word out, much like Akron Parks Challenge. We're not taking it out. We're just not making it a requirement that the ward council person approve of the program in order to be awarded, if that makes sense. But that is different That's not necessarily the case in the new Akron City Council neighborhood partnership program that we're proposing. That is more Akron City Council focused. So we're not taking it out, we're just not requiring, and I'm not sure that, council members definitely had a chance to weigh in, and I don't foresee that we're not gonna have that under Beyond the Table, but it's never been a requirement necessarily that a ward council person approve of an NPP grant before it was given. It's never been a requirement, but we certainly will consult with council on the awards before they're made.
I know when Mr. Neal proposed this neighborhood partnership program a long time ago, that was part of the thinking.
Yeah, so this is a totally new program. The NPP program, in terms of how you're thinking about it, is going to live in many respects under this new Akron City Council neighborhood.
Right.
That's why I'm saying I might be able to answer your question once we go through the other side, but if not, I can revisit it.
Yeah. The only thing I want to say, and I'll be done, Mr. Chair,
That's right.
is that it seems to me that these should be working in tandem and not be totally separate. You know, if we're going to empower wards, communities, and all of these people are working on different projects and doing things, somehow, somewhere, there needs to be leadership. And it seems to me that the people that have been elected in the wards are the leadership that the people have kind of silently appointed to kind of put together all of these programs, because we don't want one program doing this, one program doing that. Hopefully they work in tandem so we can better utilize all of these resources that we're making available.
And we certainly don't disagree, which is what you'll see in the other program. And again, we're not going to consult with council on the Beyond the Table. We will. However, these are going to be larger grant amounts. It's very likely that it's going to require more organizational skills at the neighborhood level because this is going to have bigger impact. The other thing I would say is that we are certainly in recognition of the ward council person's leadership role within a ward, but there are so many, as you know, informal neighborhood leaders and community leaders within each geography of Akron that are going to want to submit and will submit under this new program. And again, we're just not making it a requirement that they get the approval of their ward council person in order to get the award, but we'll certainly consult council to make sure that it is aligned. And the Beyond the Table program also is going to have much more detail being asked of its recipients in terms of actual outcomes along these lines. So it's not just, again, under the old NPP, it was lower dollar amounts, and you'll see that in the other one, less restrictions, and more about sort of neighborhood engagement. What we're trying to do with Beyond the Table is get to some real outcomes, because NPP, if you recall, was only supposed to be seed funding. And unfortunately, many organizations year over year over year over year became reliant on the funding, and it ceased to be seed funding and became the only reason that some organizations existed. That doesn't necessarily make it a bad thing, but Beyond the Table is trying to get to outcomes, and we have things built into the way that we're doing this to make sure that it's not just a feel-good program, but it's really trying to attack key metrics, key drivers within these three areas. For example, drugs and addiction, we're really trying to focus on stigma and reducing stigma within communities. Education and youth is tied almost directly to the Youth Violence Prevention Program and our Recreation Strategic Plan. And diversity, equity, and social inclusion is tied to Elevate Akron and a lot of the things that are already going on around infant mortality and other things. So I think that these are very evidence-based approaches where we're going to be asking recipients to show us how they are making an impact with these grants beyond just the organization still exists at the end of the grant.
I want to address a question to Ms. Tomic. Neighborhood Partnership's been around for decades, right?
22 years.
Okay, so Neighborhood Partnership's been around for 20 plus years. Then Mr. Neal, My Neighborhood, Our Akron. So we're talking about two similar things here today, but they're two separate programs.
And again, I think we can answer some of the questions once we go through the new city council program. Is my sense correct in saying that Community Foundation said, you know what,
we need to see a little more impact here. We're dabbling out $500 gifts, $1,000 gifts, and we want to direct our money differently.
Just sit right next to Steve.
At the
Steve, can you turn it on?
We're all about impact, making an impact on the community. We're very proud of the relationship we've had with the city of Akron in the last 22 years, where we've contributed $1.5 million. But again, we are all about making impact in the community, and that's why we asked the city to revisit this whole partnership. As James alluded to, this is the largest grant that we give out, so we take this very seriously, and we want to see more fruitful outcomes that come as a result of this.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how this works. I'm really wanting to know more about the next piece of legislation too, so.
But the important thing, Mr. Chair, that you identified is that part of on the table is to make sure that we're including all voices. And
Correct.
that is one of the things we don't want to exclude by trying to make these programs at such a high level that those people that are impacted by what's going on in the neighborhood are not at the table to make sure their voices are heard. So that's why we have to really be careful as we look at these as to how do we include all those voices of those folks that are saying, you know, we really need to do this, we really want to do something else, and not have folks coming in here thrusting things on folks, but making sure that those voices in those communities that are living through all of these challenges are heard.
Absolutely, and if I could add, we firmly believe at the Community Foundation and in the power of collaboration, where we encourage our nonprofits to collaborate with each other, and we encourage neighborhoods to partner up with the organizations in their neighborhoods. So to your point of council members being a part of the program, we would encourage our grantees to bring their local council person into the process to see this program through. So we would encourage that, and usually when the Community Foundation asks for something, it usually happens, especially with our grantees.
And one of the things, if I might, Mr. Chairman, is I think it's important for council to see what we're presenting today as a continuum, and to your point, Councilwoman, not two necessarily standalone programs. So it's very conceivable that someone could get started under the Neighborhood Partnership Program that Akron City Council is now going to administer and get ready for the bigger grant, and then be even more ready beyond the city to apply for big grants from the private foundation. So we're trying to create a continuum for that very purpose.
Very good. Any other committee members first before I go out of committee? Okay, Mr. Neal. Oh, I'm sorry.
Is there more to this presentation that I should wait for my questions?
So maybe I'll just, there's a second piece of legislation that authorizes this new city council program. So maybe go through that real quick, and then we can have, I think, more of a apples to apples conversation. So beyond the table, the legislation you have before you replaces the old NPP. We are creating, there's a second piece of legislation that will be read in here shortly that creates, or authorizes rather, a new city council-led program called the Akron City Council Neighborhood Partnership that takes very much the base of what NPP was. So more flexibility, you can do parades, you can do neighborhood organizations, you can do a newsletter, you can do more smaller dollar basic things, and puts council in more control, and also releases some of the inflexibility that was existing within My Neighborhood or Akron. So it makes it easier and more flexible to get dollars to the best idea. So let me go through that real quick. We're proposing, or in partnership with council leadership, award amounts would be no less than $1,000, because I can tell you our staff who have administered $500 grants for almost 30 years will tell you that is not a good use of staff time. So at least $1,000, but no more than $8,000. Yes, there is an $8,000 per award limit. However, it's flexible, okay? So if you wanted to, you could have one $8,000 grantee from that ward, or 8 $1,000 grantees, and everything in between. And the way it's going to work is a paper submission to the clerk of city council. The clerk will organize all of those applications once a year. There will be a grant selection committee. Well, the first step is it goes to the ward council person, and the ward council person reviews any and all applications from their ward for a grant, and either recommends that grant or does not recommend that grant. And the recommended grants go to the Grant Selection Committee, which is half city council, 3 members of city council appointed by the council president, 3 members of the administration appointed by the mayor, and the council clerk. And they make the final decision as to the awards each year. So it puts the ward council person in the driver's seat in terms of what they would like to do. And I recall Councilwoman Samples talking about, well, how can we encourage collaboration between wards? If there's a project that is beneficial to 2 wards, those council persons can come together and say, let's have a $16,000 project and let's make big impact. So it really puts the ward council person and then council in the driver's seat in terms of how those dollars are allocated. And again, the neighborhood focus areas are pretty much part and parcel of what NPP was. There is no match. We've eliminated the match requirement because we're going to be using local dollars, not federal dollars for this. So there's no match requirement. And again, it puts city council in the driver's seat. We think because this is more like the old NPP, we'd like to get this underway ASAP this year. Again, with a July 12th due date, we can move that up for next year. It's just that we're a little delayed this year in reforming the program. But we are also doubling the amount of money that was in My Neighborhood, Our Akron. So we're putting another $40,000 under the leadership of Council President Somerville. That was her request, that we double the money. We make it a real pot of money to give council members an opportunity, again, to make an impact and drive some of that impact within their individual wards.
By virtue of the fact that we're using our, I'll say our funds for this program, I know it's still going to be on a reimbursement basis. Do
Correct.
you see the window of time from when we receive the receipt to when the person's paid, reimbursed? Do you see that shortening up some?
I do. We are going to have, first of all, we have been averaging 50+ awards a year under NPP. Even with this, we're going to be in a less number, so the sheer number of contracts that will need to be executed will be less. You're absolutely right, Mr. Chairman. Because we're using our local funds and because we're going to have it not on a rolling basis, we're going to have a very structured application process every year, that we'll be able to be better at that, but it will still be reimbursement basis.
Yeah, some folks,
I know, they wait a
cash
year.
flow just,
I know.
have $2,000 laying around. So, yeah, if that gets shortened up, I think that would, to organizations that are using the funds, that would be.
That's our goal.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Just one thing that I wanted to say. Also, with us eliminating the matching piece of it, we are very confident that we will be able to get the reimbursements back to the nonprofit groups a lot sooner.
Thank you.
Very good point.
Okay, so now we're talking about the second piece of legislation. We're going to have to come back. Questions or comments? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Now, let's, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand. Okay, go right ahead. No, go right ahead. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Have a couple questions. First, starting off with the Beyond the Table, which is replacing the old neighborhood partnership grants. This looks like there's total funding of $200,000. In the past, what has been our total allotment of neighborhood partnership grant dollars that have gone out?
So we've budgeted $200,000 each year, $100,000 from the city and $100 from Akron Community Foundation.
But in the past, what has been the amount that's gone out each year?
Typically get close to it.
Yeah, it's been over 200.
Put out each year.
We, typically, we'd probably go a little bit over budget, just thinking that some folks now aren't going to spend their money, but officially it's been 200,000.
Okay, because that's my concern. I know we've gone over in the past, and when we look at this, and I see this thing, diversity, equity, and we've talked about using these words in these chambers and not having definitions. What is equity? We don't have a definition for it. And those things, those words pop up, and there are people running, forming organizations because of, or forming proposals because of the dollars. We don't have a way of vetting what's equity. Now, even in the way we're proposing to present the program, it's challenging because to the best proposal, well, that's a challenge right there when you talk about doing things equitably, because there are some groups who have the technical support, the infrastructure to where they can put together a grant and a better proposal right off the rip. Communities that are challenged, that are facing a lot of these challenges, don't have that infrastructure and that support. So, you know, we've got to have this discussion, folks. We dance around it, When we cannot implement this program equitably. There's no way to do it, because not every community has an East Akron Neighborhood Development Corporation. Not every community has a South Street Ministries or a well. And then even if they do, those organizations don't necessarily represent the interests of the whole community. So we need to put together a process to make sure that when we do these things, they're truly equitable. And so that's my concern with this, because, you know, I know we don't want it to be seed money, but I can think of several things that have come to rely on these dollars because they don't have, the communities don't have the financial wherewithal to support those organizations and those programs. There are some programs that have more financial support. I mean, I wish we all could have a salt mine. I envy Kenmore. You know, they have a salt mine. They have resources that come in to help supplement what they do. And so I think if we're looking at really doing this the right way, we have to have, this is a good start. Don't want to knock it, but one, we've got to look at what was done in the past and really talk to those groups that have had to sustain their programs off of these dollars.
So if I might, again, I would reiterate that we see these programs in tandem as a continuum.
I'm just talking about the one, sir. I'm just talking about...
If I may.
Well, I wasn't finished. So I mean, amongst this group, we really do have to have a discussion about what's, you know, how to equitably support investing in all of our communities. I mean, some communities are just better equipped where, I mean, they utilize the city funds, but they get stuff done even without the city because they have that type of resource inside their community. So, you know, that's the one thing. And then I heard that Councilwoman Amobian's point, I think it's crucial that if we're, and I know with Neighborhood Partnership it's never been, like you said, ward specific, but I know when we usually do, we all go through and we see what comes in our ward. It's usually a balance between how much money comes to what ward. I know my ward was fortunate to usually get, I may be wrong, somewhere around 28 to maybe as much as $30,000 when I looked at all the organizations. I don't know how that's going to fall out this time. So that's my major concern with the Beyond the Table. I'll hold off to comment on the Akron City Council portion until everybody else outside of the Budget Committee has a chance to speak on the Beyond the Table piece.
Mr. Hardy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in response to that, again, we see these as a continuum of grant dollars from the very basic, I have a $1,000 idea to improve my neighborhood, all the way up to a much more complex, much more potentially impactful $20,000 grant award. And from my perspective, we've been doing NPP for almost 30 years with little $1,000 here and $7,500 there. And you're right, council member, these groups, many of them have come to rely on this money, meaning that there's no other validation of the outcomes that they are or are not getting, because we never asked for outcomes under the old program. We never asked for outcomes. You either did the parade or you didn't. That was the outcome. And yet, through Elevate Akron, through every study that we've ever quoted here around the horseshoe, we aren't getting it done in terms of outcomes. So yes, we are trying to create a continuum to where you can start with almost no resources to get your neighborhood up and going, all the way to a more complex project that has hard outcomes that you must follow, which is what every grant program has. We've never had it. And I think it's important for the dollars that go into these programs that we ask for certain outcomes and we expect certain outcomes and we verify certain outcomes, the higher the dollar amount goes. But it is very likely that some of the best ideas we're going to get are going to be $1,500 ideas that come through the city council program. But I guarantee you that by making the Beyond the Table program more attractive, more impactful, more ability to get stuff done, $7,500 isn't a lot when you are an EANDC, when you are a South Street Ministries. You can't do a whole awful lot with $7,500, but you can do a lot with 20. And so it's a continuum, not a separate program, the two shall meet. And at the end of the day, I will advocate strongly that any dollar that we spend, even if it is $1,000, that we have some measurable outcome, that we are asking folks, with all of the challenges we have, we can no longer afford to give money to organizations and not ask that there be a measurable impact across some sort of metric.
Mr. Swirsky?
Oh, just, I'm grateful that you guys are working together. I think the idea of an expecting outcome is even better. And are you going to continue to help, if, say, a small group or doesn't have expertise in grant writing, are we going to continue the practice of helping people prepare their grants, providing some assistance? And who would they call for that assistance? And even if they don't need help, but just want to know, talk to people, where should they direct their questions?
Sure. So we are providing help, not just in this grant program, but with all the grant programs we're doing in integrated development and across the city. We're utilizing and we're striking a partnership with the Foundation Center out of Cleveland and the library to be a partner every time we do informational sessions, ward meetings, anytime you need someone to come out and talk about how to successfully, the 101 of application preparation, we can do that. We also have, although it is not her, she's writing grants on behalf of the city, but Melinda Samsel goes above and beyond every day to help people who have questions as it relates to the grants that they submit, as does the Akron Community Foundation. And John, maybe you can remark as well that already some of the folks that used to get funding under MPP, Akron Community Foundation has helped them to source other funding. So we're not getting phones ringing off the hook completely because other people have found other funding.
And for the Beyond the Table program, being that it's an online-based program, my number is there that if people have questions on how to complete the application, whether they qualify or not, I am more than happy to take that on as a responsibility to answer their questions.
Ms. Samples?
Thank you. I have a couple questions. So will the individuals who normally apply for this funding for National Night Out Against Crime, will we make sure that all those individuals know that there's going to be funding available, or we found another funding source for that program? That's my first question.
Yes, we are going to, through neighborhood assistance, we're going to make sure any grantee, whether it's My Neighborhood or Akron or NPP, knows about the new programs.
Okay. And then secondly, I know Mr. Neal brought up the thing about making sure certain groups know how to maneuver through the system of applying. It's a little different now that it's online, so I don't know, how do we balance that out? Because usually in the past, I have meetings with my residents. I've done this since I've come on council. I have meetings with them. I sit with them through the application process. Helen has even came to one of my meetings, and she sat with my residents, and that year, I got close to $90,000 in awards. She sat with them the whole time for them to understand the process, and I think that's important. It's good that it's online and we're doing the electronic thing, but we're going to still have those groups that may be an issue for them. So I think maybe if we could get you to come to one of our meetings. Yeah. I think I probably need to have a meeting really quick because I have a lot of residents who are requesting applications, and now that it's online, I think they're going to really need to know how to maneuver that part of the process. So I want to make sure I get my card to you and to James or whomever so we can.
And we will definitely, we being planning, economic development, we will come to any ward meeting. And again, it's only the Beyond the Table that's electronic. So
that's
the
what
city
I'm
council,
talking
yep.
about. Yeah.
And we will still make paper copies available if folks don't have access. That's not we can input it ourselves, but we will we still plan on coming to any and all community meetings that we would typically come to for these programs.
Okay, and then my last question, I know it was stated that they're not going to give out a whole bunch of awards to the same group, because I've noticed in the past, we'll have a group that'll get 3 and 4 different awards, and they're doing all these different things, but it's all going to the same organization. My only concern is, what if they're acting as a fiscal agent and they're not actually the person getting it? Will there be some kind of balance in there that we know they're just acting as a fiscal agent and they're not actually the person getting the award?
Yes. So we're really looking at programs, and maybe that's the way I should say, is that it's not that Beyond the Table, and again, the Akron City Council program is totally different, but it's not that Beyond the Table wouldn't fund the same program year over year, but there's more scrutiny each year to what are you doing differently to grow the program, expand it, et cetera. So yeah, if one entity is a fiscal agent for 4 or 5 very separate applications, that would not count against that fiscal agent. It's really looking at duplicating programming.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll make one more comment about Beyond the Table before I go to the Akron City Council portion of this. Again, for the Beyond the Table portion, it would be good for us to revisit how this has been allocated in the past, what organizations applied for this, and then look at, we're asking people to apply, again, for diversity. I don't know what that, we've got like what comes to mind is the World Global Festival that we used to have. That was a diversity inclusive program. Everything else is pretty culturally specific, be it the African Festival, Italian Festival, Irish Festival. But this equity piece, when we talk about equity, equity doesn't mean equally. It doesn't mean everybody's going to get $20,000. Equity means if there's a community that is more suppressed by a certain matter, that community may get $90,000, may get $50,000. Equity doesn't mean equally. And I want to come back to that. This council and the administration has never put together a policy to understand that. We did look at that with the one grant that's on the, I don't know if it's on the consent agenda today, because I think it is on consent agenda, where we understood that certain areas have a higher level of crime. So those dollars are going to there. But to one of my council person's question, Mr. Swirsky at the time said, everywhere is having gun violence. So what are we going to do to address those areas? So equitably, what we would do is look at where are the higher levels of incidences of gun violence and invest our dollars as best we can in those areas as well as others. So we got to have this discussion. We kick these words around, but I see this being problematic because there are organizations that don't have the technical support, that do the work religiously. That's my last comment on the Beyond the Table. With the Akron City Council Neighborhood Partnership Grant, I understand, I know it's probably cumbersome to do the smaller grants. I don't know if we've done a review of the grants that have come through in the past, but I can remember a lot of community gardens that came through at that $250, $500 point. A lot of things came in under $1,000. And what is happening at $1,000 right now, it kind of excludes those organizations from being able to get any kind of reimbursement from that. So, again, I wouldn't know for sure, but I think it would be good for us to look at what were the majority of those grants that came in under the My Neighborhood or Akron, and make sure that we're not excluding anyone from that point. And then I looked at the funding, the $8,000 coming from the general fund. That's kind of ambiguous. At the maximum when we funded this program, it was $10,000, and we funded it looking at, because at that time, and I believe it's still the case, the city gets back $100,000 to $120,000 every year in credit card rebates. So without having to tax take any money from our income tax dollars or property tax dollars or anything like that, we were basing that funding off of, the credit card rebates that came in. But as a council, to better fund both programs, something we may want to look at are three areas. One, remember when we moved our health department over to the county, we saved $1 million a year. We never looked at, and that was maybe 8 years ago now we've done that, maybe right around there. We never looked at how to bring some of that savings into addressing some of these issues. And we know that a lot of things that we're talking about, and just even on this list that we're looking at here, are health-related issues. We were supposed to reallocate some of that savings in that way. Another potential funding source for these programs are, you know, we have the search and seizure dollars that are over at the police department. There's about $1 million there. That money, not even looking at the principal, the investment portion from that, the interest that comes from that, investing those dollars to support this. And then last but not least, Mr. Chairman, in 2017, we received a rebate of about $1.2 million that I don't think it hit us until last year. But $1.2 million in our workers' comp that came back. This year, the state is projecting that companies and municipalities are going to get about a 90% refund again on their workers' comp. That means that if it stays the same, we're going to get about $1.2 million coming back to council. I think it behooves us to do our point as council, working with the administration, to allocate those funds appropriately. Last year, I think they just went back into the general fund, and this council didn't have any say on where they went. When I talked to, you know, members on other city councils and even our Summit County Council, they met and reappropriated those funds to areas of concern that they felt needed to be addressed. So, yeah, I just want to put that on there because this is the only time we have to talk about this, and we always want to cut conversations short. But this is the only time we have the opportunity to kind of talk about these types of things and actually set goals and objectives. We want metrics, we want measurables for those who apply for these grants. We're responsible for a much larger budget. And here we've identified, we talked about three issues: $1 million savings, $1 million in search and seizure that's accruing interest, and then somewhere in the area, based on the state's projections of a 1.2 or more coming back, if it's like last time, coming back to this council, money that we have direct responsibility over and that we can appropriate to address these needs. Because if we're equitable, as my one colleague mentioned, she said $90,000, that takes half of this money right off the table, and that's one ward. And I'm not saying her ward doesn't need it, because it kind of stretches across the city. But all of us have needs, and we have an opportunity to address, get more funding. And last but not least, to my colleague's point about providing technical support, I know it's probably burdensome for the small group we have. We need to look at how to support, how to beef that up so that our organizations can be better prepared to apply for these grants. And when they learn how to apply for our grants, they're better prepared to apply for grants even outside of our program. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Ms. Keith?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. May I direct a question to Mr. Valley, Mr. Chair? Is that okay if I do it? How long have we had the My Neighborhood, Our Akron grant program?
4 years. 2015 was the first year.
Okay. I've been on that committee for those 4 years, and I'm going to tell you, I don't think I ever missed a meeting, and I don't think I ever missed an email, requested something. So when I read here that the applications were difficult to navigate, I will take exception to that, not personal exception, but I will take exception to that. People didn't fill them out. They would also miss something that needed to be done and needed to be clarified. The other thing is, with money not getting back to the people as quickly as necessary, a lot of times we didn't have the receipts for them, so we were following procedures and policy. Having said that, I am concerned that the My Neighborhood, Our Akron partnership, it's no longer even My Neighborhood, Our Akron, I'm concerned that this would be taken from where it is right now and removed and brought into a broader picture, and then having a committee that okays it. And maybe I should base it on, we just applied as a ward for the Parks Challenge. And it was very discerning to me that we didn't get it, because I'm going to tell you, I thought the effort was there and I thought the need was there. And then having a group say that we don't get it, I think throws it back on the council person of, if they're not on the committee, how is that balanced, number one? Because what we would do with every application that came through My Neighborhood, Our Akron, we sent it to the council person and asked them to look it over. So we became aware if we weren't aware of the need. And we could also champion it as something that was good or not good. A lot of these things that are being mentioned down here there was some difficulty with them underneath the focus of the events, and as to whether they did serve the entire neighborhood or some of the neighborhood. And I guess in all, what my concern is, and I don't even know if it can be applied here, I will try to work with it with leadership, but many of the things that took place in my ward in particular had to do with our parks. And we were taking upon ourselves as residents to care for what the city owned, and which was responsibility. And I find now that this has now become a different situation, which I'm not sure, it possibly could benefit, but I also see that I know from going to so many of these meetings and discussing these grants that sometimes it is that little guy that just has an idea that maybe just takes care of an area and it isn't worth $1,000. And also the fact that $8,000 could be awarded to one thing. That means one thing is the thing for the ward. I think it gets away from the concept of how My Neighborhood, Our Akron was started and what its vision was. But I'm hoping that we take time with this so that more of these questions can be addressed, and so that we don't have the feeling of that little guy once again is put over here, and if it isn't a big enough thing, they're not going to get it.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Councilwoman, and I appreciate it. I'd like to address the concerns you have with the Parks Challenge. This is exactly why the selection committee only has one city representative on it. These are outside eyes so that we don't have hurt feelings about who wins and who doesn't. They were all fabulous. Every one of them was deserving, but the way we structure it, we did two this year. But Akron Parks Collaborative is going to be following up, Bridget, personally, with every single person who made the final cut and figuring out how we can get other funds, just like she did last year, to those successful parks. And there's going to be hopefully a next year if council allows that, and a year after that, and a year after that. And I think one thing we have to be clear about is whether you like these programs, whether you throw it out and we start over, whether we have no grant programs, not everybody's going to get awarded. If you have a grant program where every applicant gets something, that is not a grant program, that is a giveaway. So if we're going to have a grant program, there needs to be standards. Some people are going to apply, some people aren't going to get it, and that's the way it's going to go. Otherwise, it's literally just a one time a year, come and get your money from the city of Akron. The second thing is that one of the biggest criticisms of My Neighborhood, Our Akron was how inflexible the dollars were. You could not get more than, I think it was $1,000 or $1,500, John? $1,000, which is not a whole heck of a lot. And the hoops you had to go through were pretty intense. We also got criticism from members of this horseshoe that there were not a lot of opportunity for ward council people to make the selection of what they wanted to do each and every year in their ward, This provides maximum flexibility. You're right. You could have one $8,000 award, or the ward council person could say, I want 8 $1,000 awards, or I'm going to do 2 $4,000 awards. We're putting the power back into the council members' hands under this. And again, we're not, city council, if you count the clerk, outvotes the administration on this program in terms of the dollars that go out. Yeah, so under the Akron City Council Neighborhood Partner Program, City Council outvotes the administration when the final grants come in. It's 3 council members, the clerk, and 3 from the administration. So there are 4 people coming out of the council's office that will make the final determination, but it's hopefully a collaboration between those that are on the grant selection, looking at the recommendations from the ward council person and giving them deference wherever possible. So we're trying to maximize it. But My Neighborhood or Akron had a selection committee as well that had outside people and inside people and city people and non-city people, but there was a selection committee that made final decisions of yes or no. And so this, we hope, we think, provides more flexibility to this council to decide how these dollars under this program are going to be working in your wards. That's the goal anyway.
Sims.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just my last year going on record as saying I sure wish at-large members got money too. I don't know why we couldn't find $92,000 and at least give us at least $4,000. So maybe next year sometime. But with regards to Beyond the Table, I don't know how we are planning to kind of monitor whether we should move to a ward-specific allocation or not, but I think that it's worth watching for, only because the uniqueness of On the Table that brought just a pure cross-section of the community to the table, and to feel like there was some exclusion of your voice when the money came just is a little concerning for me, so that we watch for that. My second question is, we've identified 3 really healthy pillars relative to Beyond the Table. Are we planning to allocate those funds equally, like a third, a third, a third? Or have we looked at doing that? I'm hoping that we did, because I think it will help get at some of how we can diversify how the resources go out, to perhaps look at it that way. So
sure. I think that's a good point. I think it's going to be difficult until the first year applications come in. For example, if the education and youth pillar really speaks to a large number of applicants, but we only get 2 for drugs and addiction, then we may need to look at how that goes. But I think that in general, again, we don't have, just like with MPP, we don't have a set dollar amount per ward, but our goal obviously is to bring geographic parity across these 3, obviously in the marketing that we'll do together and going out into the community. This year will be a little abbreviated just because it's the first year. Next year we'll have a full year to get out there. But the idea is that we would have parity across of those. But I think with any new program, we're going to take a look at it, and if we find that one pillar over another just wasn't speaking to a lot of applicants that year, we'll try and figure out how we can either improve upon it next year or take a look at being more clear the following year in terms of how you use those dollars for that pillar.
So, Mr. Hardy, just so that it doesn't, when we start out the gate, it's always hard to go back and kind of add. So if we're very conscious of it, only reason why I say that, as we are still in the throes of dealing with issues around Elevate Akron, because a certain group didn't show up, they kind of gotten forgotten about. So if we are up front to say, well, we know all 3 of these issues have been issues that have been resurfacing in our city for at least really the last 4 years on a much visible level. So to start out intentionally saying, this is how we're going to look at the pool of resources, and this is how we're going to allocate these funds in a I don't know, if I want to use the term equitable, but I think that's the term that would come to mind for me, that we would think about that on the front end so we don't have those exclusions.
Sure.
Thank you.
Samples?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two questions. Councilwoman Keith requested maybe us taking some time to look at some things a little more. Are we going to be able to be flexible on the due date? Because I'm concerned about July is right around the corner.
Sure. I mean, our respectful request to the committee would be to give this a week's time, and then we come back next week. We'll be available to answer any questions between now and then, but hopefully move on it. Those are how we calculated the due dates. Okay. If for any reason council takes additional time, we can recalibrate that for sure.
Okay, and then my last question would probably be for the Akron Community Foundation. So when you put this on your website, I know there's a lot of different initiatives on here. How do we send it? Will there be a list supplied to them to send the people from the past who have applied for the MPP so they know that there's a new procedure and process in place? Because there's a lot of people who go on this website and apply for, and I'm just more concerned about the people who normally apply, not knowing and missing a deadline and not having an opportunity to apply. And then we have a whole group of people who are used to going to your website to look for those different initiatives. But then we have the people who normally apply, have no clue how to maneuver this system. So I'm just hoping that we don't forget about the individuals who apply every year.
We are committed to making sure, as we have through this process, that we communicate with anyone who's received any one of those grants, whether it's My Neighborhood or Akron or NPP. We also, John, Director Valley had a good point. We can make the application for both downloadable from City Council's website. We'll make them available anywhere, anytime. Again, Helen and her team, John and his team are members of both. If you send us a date and a time where you want a representative out to talk about either program, we will be there with paper copies or with an explanation on how, if someone so chooses, they submit online for the Beyond the Table.
Yes, Ms. Mobian?
Just a question. I'm assuming that the 3 bullet items that you have identified under Beyond the Table, there will be some kind of blurb other than just the title? Because I can envision many programs with education and youth and diversity and equity and social inclusion. Just curious as to what your thinking would be for drugs and addiction. I can think of things that are more treatment related because that's the field I'm in, but I'm just curious as to what you would be looking for, but not to answer today, but just curious as to how you would have a blurb about each one.
Yeah, if I can answer your first part. On the application that Mr. Hardy is holding up, there's a paragraph on each of them that give examples of what that means and the definitions of what diversity, equity, and inclusion means.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
And Mrs. Mobian, Helen assures me we will have the guidelines for Beyond the Table in your mailboxes by the close of business today.
Thank you.
Apologies, it wasn't there before.
Okay, we've kind of been talking about both the resolution and the ordinance, but I need someone to make...
Need to go back to number 1, Mr.
Right,
Freeman.
that's, yeah. Number 1, can we take a week's time motion for that?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, excellent. We'll move on to number 2, which we've talked about here. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Department of Neighborhood Assistance or his designee to enter into contracts with nonprofit neighborhood-based organizations for the provision of services and/or projects, including, among other things, neighborhood events, community gardens, beautification projects, after-school programs, and mentoring programs, authorizing payment, therefore reallocating funding and declaring an emergency.
Motion for time.
Okay, motion for time on that as well. Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, great. And we can direct questions to you folks this week as we would...
Please, yeah, direct them to Helen, and we can get them answered ASAP.
Okay, very good. All right, thank you. If we have nothing else to come before us, we are adjourned at 4:03. Thank you.
My ward.
I'm sorry, 3:59.
Ward 1. Yeah. People started asking me about it. I thought I heard you say they should call you.
Yeah, I'm the contact person, and one of my staff members is going to be taking it on at the project as well, so I can get cards that James can hand out, or just look me up on the website.